Okay, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining the AXIT and F5 Shape um, uh, lunch webinar. You know, we want to talk about how F5 Shape product can help you reduce fraud, reduce friction, and do less effort uh, in less effort compared to your existing solutions and situations. Um, through Shape Enterprise, Safe, as well as Recognize. Um, it's should be a half hour, 45-minute presentation along with a sort of a question and answer session at the end. So if you could hold your questions or add them in the chat or Q&A, we can get to it. And that being said, I'll turn it over to Troy Evanson, who is the sales director, Shape Security. So.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. Pleasure to have everybody on here. Let me go ahead and share out my screen real quick and we can jump into this. If you guys want to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A during the presentation, I'll do my best to answer them at the end. I'm not sure with the format if you're going to be able to unmute and ask questions live or not, but let's give it a shot at the end. So Shape Security. If you're unfamiliar with Shape Security, I'll dive into that a little bit, but I'm sure you're familiar with F5. F5 has been providing app delivery and, as they like to say, code to customer securely for many, many years. And throughout that time period, what they came to realize is that criminals shifted how they attacked applications. It used to be a focus on vulnerabilities, and that has shifted over to using the application exactly as it was built to be used. So they're impersonating. And so as they saw that shift and saw Shape as the market leader to solving that problem, they acquired Shape almost a year ago, January of last year, for $1 billion, which should tell you the gravity of the situation and how serious F5 views solving this problem. So who is Shape? Well, I can almost guarantee that you use Shape on a daily basis. The average adult in the US has 4 applications on their phone that's protected by Shape, but you wouldn't know it. We sit in the background. One of our big important things to us is that you don't know we're there. We want to reduce friction, not increase friction. As you can see, we have a pretty broad stroke of customers across many different segments, and we see a lot of traffic each and every day. Okay, so kind of going back to what I started with, attackers no longer go after vulnerabilities as their primary attack surface. They're using your applications exactly as you built them to be used. And as they do that, they're able to commit fraud because it's extremely difficult to detect whether or not this request to the application is a real user or not. And not only is it a real user, but is it somebody that you want? So attackers have to lie really about 3 things in order to commit fraud. 1, they have to lie about whether or not they're human. 2, if they're good or bad, and are you really who you say you are? And these are the 3 problems that Shape solves. Okay. So let's go through our actual platform. So fiction is the first area that we like to call it, which is really understanding what your traffic is and who it is. The second piece is understanding the fraud equation, which is, are they good or bad? And then third is the friction. Is this a returning customer? Is it somebody that you want coming back and to make it easier for them to transact and interact with your application? And we're able to address all 3 of those areas, if the slide will update, through our 3 different products on our platform, which are Shape Enterprise Defense, Safe, and Recognize. And I'll dive into each of these specifically. But first, let's start with Shape Enterprise Defense. This is our core offering. This is what most people are familiar with when they think about Shape. Okay, this is a real life customer, and this is an experience as they came to us that they were having. So this isn't just a fictitious story. This is something that we actually saw. So when this particular customer came to us, they were having troubles understanding their traffic. And they had all the tools that you would expect to have, and they were still having a tough time understanding what was going on. They're having a large number of failed logins, and they suspected that this was automation, but they didn't know for sure. So when they came to Shape and they want to put us in line, this is what we're able to show them. And this is really the first big piece of what Shape does. we're able to identify which traffic is attack traffic, which traffic is automation, but it's coming from a partner or a source that you want, and human traffic. And in so doing, you're able to eliminate all this attack traffic and better understand your human logins or interactions with your application better so that you can improve that experience for them. This is not uncommon. A lot of times when we throw up these numbers of 90+% automation, people are kind of shocked and say, oh, that's not us. The vast majority of proof of concepts and customers that we have when we go in line are sitting above 60% automation. This is not uncommon. And as you can see in the top right there, we've actually seen close to 100% automation on applications. So it's like this across the board. Now, two of our customers who were able to use their name and they absolutely love Shape is Chipotle and Starbucks. And most people don't really recognize this, but if you took all the gift cards that are sitting on Starbucks, the dollar value, it would make them the 9th largest bank in the world. And they were having a massive problem with threat actors coming and taking over gift cards and then using those gift cards. And they're losing close to $20 million a month when they came to Shape. And they already had some existing solutions in place that were unable to stop it. And when they brought Shape in, we're able to put an end to it immediately and have been doing so successfully ever since then, going back to 2014. Dave here moved over from Starbucks to Chipotle, and Chipotle was having a similar issue. And so he brought in Shape and we're able to solve that problem for Chipotle as well. So how does Shape do this? So Shape is really good at leveraging JavaScript to collect signals or telemetry from web applications. For mobile applications, we use our mobile SDK to collect a similar level of telemetry or signals. And this is just to go to show how well Shape understands JavaScript. Okay, 5 of the last 9 official features that were added came from Shape. And that's from all the different organizations in the world that are contributing and using JavaScript. So the fact that what you would call a smaller company, Shape, was able to provide more than half of those demonstrates our level of expertise. So I'm going to break it down into the 3 main areas that we look at when it comes to identifying whether or not you're a human being or a bot. So the first is your behavior. How is this individual interacting with the application? And we grab all sorts of signals or telemetry. Okay, these little blue dots and red dots, those represent mouse clicks. And then the green line that you'll see pop up here in a minute, that's a mouse movement. You'll notice how non-straight that movement is. It's very human-like. You'll also notice at the top here as this yellow bar moves across the screen, that's the timing that's taking place with the interaction. And then these red lines up here, and then appear here as black lines, these are keystrokes. And we're collecting how fast they're typing keys. We don't collect the actual key that they're typing outside of Shift and Control and Enter, but we're looking at the timing of those as well as the different window widths. Okay, these are some of the user behaviors that we collect. Now I'm only talking about a few of the signals we collect, and we collect hundreds of these, okay? And that next thing we look at is the browser. And a lot of people call this a browser fingerprint. And some of the additional signals that we're looking at besides the plugins, the fonts, the screen size are things like emojis. Because if you remember how I was talking about, in order for a threat actor to attack you and commit fraud on your application and impersonate a person, a legitimate user, they have to lie about who they are, because the attack tools that they build are pretty easy to identify that they're not real browsers. So they have to lie about who they are. And so when that application comes, or that request from that application comes, I can start poking holes in their story to see if they're lying. One of the ways I can do that is simply by saying, hey, render me an emoji. And every single platform renders an emoji differently, okay? Another way is by having them solve a large math problem that is always going to have rounding errors. And every single platform handles those rounding errors differently. So by identifying those lies, I'm able to know whether or not this is a human being. Now, this last one, this is header. Everybody knows header information. It's pretty easy to collect this information. But one of the examples I like to use as to why Shape's able to bring so much value to this header information comes from a previous background of mine, which is law enforcement. I'm trained in pulling fingerprints. I'm pretty proficient at it, and I can come and pull your fingerprint. The problem is, if I go and pull Brian's fingerprint right now, I don't have anything to compare it against. And so it's pretty useless, even though I have that information. Whereas Shape has a massive database, over 2 billion requests per day to compare that fingerprint against. And so when you take the header fingerprint, the user behaviors, and the browser fingerprint, and you pull all that information together and you compare it against the network and the threat intelligence that we have, it makes us extremely good at identifying whether or not you're a human being or a bot. Okay. Now, I'm going to start talking about those next two pieces of the equation which Shape solves. Okay, so it's not just about eliminating all the fiction, but eliminating the fraud as well as the friction. So here's kind of the life cycle or the path of an application, right? You've got the beginning where you're creating an account, logging in, and then you have the different behaviors and things that you can do in between. We'll call that the middle, whether that's adding things to the cart, adding a credit card, shopping around, and then you've got the end where you're actually making the transaction occur. And the vast majority of fraud solutions really just focus on this end piece, okay? But by looking at the entire equation, we're able to do a lot more with it. So the first thing that we talked about was Shape Enterprise Defense, which is what we're known for and is really just looking at the creating the account and the login. Is this request coming from a human being or a bot? So we're protecting the front door. But then the next thing that Shape does that people aren't as familiar with is something called Shape Safe. This is the Shape anti-fraud engine. This is our anti-fraud solution. And it looks at all the traffic. It's not just looking at the traffic that comes through the front door, through the account creation and login, but we actually collect telemetry across all the different pages and all the different requests. And in doing so, we're able to identify fraud on a level that is superior to the current fraud solutions out there. And I'll go into an actual use case to prove out that point, okay? So Safe is about eliminating fraud. The last piece is called Shape Recognize. And what Shape Recognize does is something very, very different than what else is out there. Shape Recognize is going and rescuing users who are having trouble logging in by recognizing them from previous sessions. Now, it's pretty typical to do that using a cookie. Shape doesn't do it using a cookie, including if the person was jumping from an incognito browser to a regular browser or deleting their cookies and clearing their cache, we would still be able to detect and know that that is the person that indeed should be logging into that account by recognizing the telemetry that we collect. So it's a very different approach to recognizing a user. And in doing so, we've actually proven to be able to recapture revenue for organizations, like a couple of the airlines using the solution right now, from people who normally were having trouble logging in to the point where they abandoned the cart or went somewhere else to shop. And we're able to go through and recognize and reclaim that revenue for the organization. So it's not just about stopping them in the front door. It's not just about stopping the fraud from beginning to end, but it's also removing that friction so that your users can interact with your application a lot more friendly and successfully, okay? So this specific example is where we're able to come in and recognize an additional 3 to 5% of total users who are failing to log in successfully and enable them to come and transact with the organization, whereas before they were unable to do that and they were leaving. All right, so this Safe piece. Let me go into a little bit more detail about this fraud piece, or Safe, the Shape anti-fraud engine. So Safe takes all of the things that we've learned over the last 9 years of being in business around the telemetry, and the JavaScript and how humans interact with your applications. And we leverage that information to better understand who is actually accessing the application and being able to stop them from accessing that application or transact with it real time when it's flagged as fraud. The way I like to explain safe is if I had a fake ID, I could probably get through security at the airport with a fake ID. And if that's all they were looking at, it would be challenging for them to stop somebody who was trying to get through security. Now, if you understood how somebody moved, and I guarantee everybody can appreciate this, but when you really know somebody, you know how they walk, you know how they talk, you know how they interact with you and other people. And you can typically pick that person out of a crowd just the way that they're moving. That's what SAFE does. SAFE is grabbing these behaviors. It's learning how a person works, moves, interacts to a point where it can't be faked by somebody else. And in so doing, we're able to detect and stop fraud on a much higher scale than our competitors. So we already talked about recognize a little bit, so I'm going to skip over this one and jump into the story around SAFE specifically, okay? So the value proposition, or what really SHAPE brings to the table, is reducing the fraud, reducing the friction, and making it so you have to put in less effort to accomplish those two things. This is an actual bank that we are working with. Let's see if I can get this to pull up, where we were sitting behind all their current fraud tools. Okay, this is one of the largest banks in the US. And you can imagine the fraud tools that this bank has in place. They put SHAPE behind all these fraud tools. And what SHAPE was able to do was detect an additional 177% fraud beyond what their current fraud tools were detecting. That is a massive number. And in my opinion, is very, very impressive. And that's with a 0.1% false positive rate. If you have a little bit more tolerance for false positives, and we take that false positive rate up to 0.5%, we're able to detect 276% more than all their existing fraud solutions. So this works. We truly are able to eliminate all the traffic that is non-human. We're able to stop a significant more amount of fraud hitting the application and your organization. And we're able to rescue users who are challenged in logging in or interacting with your application by recognizing who they are. So in a nutshell, that's what SHAPE does. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing at this point, and we will open this up to Q&A.
We have a question from Steven Garcia. He says, could we expect any type of enhancements to this process if we had an identity management at the customer end? For example, Major League Baseball uses Okta as their IAM platform for customers. Could that be integrated with F5 SHAPE?
It can. So there's a couple different pieces to the solutions. One's called Device ID Plus. And this is one that you can specifically plug into your SIM and leverage with your other fraud tools. And what it's doing is it's taking this same technology that we use around telemetry and signals, and it's identifying a very specific device. Now, it's important to note that SHAPE does not identify, hey, this device belongs to Brian. What it identifies is this device accesses this account, and it's supposed to be accessing this account, and it does it successfully. And so we're able to tie that device to that account, not an individual person. But regardless, we're able to detect if that device truly is the device across multiple browsers, and including if they're clearing cookies and things of that nature. And you can take that information, and by the way, Device ID Plus is free to any F5 customer, and leverage that with your SIM and the other information coming from Okta to improve the security, as well as identifying whether or not that person should be using multi-factor authentication. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and also, I mean, that's a good corner case, but I mean, it's the general scenario as well. Putting that in front of Okta, at your IDP, just like normal, would also be something that could be useful as well.
So I've got two other questions in here. The first is around what's required to install this application. Is it server-based and also client-based solution? So there's many ways that you can deploy Shape, including a model where you leverage an existing F5 Big IP product, one of their LTMs. You can leverage a CDN to route traffic to Shape. You can do a DNS cutover to get traffic to Shape. And in all those cases, the traffic is actually routing to a Shape cloud, where we're making the analysis and then passing only healthy traffic on. But another way is through an API deployment, where if you don't want the traffic actually traversing to Shape or another cloud, we can set up an API call where the telemetry is still being collected. There's a number of ways to make sure that the telemetry is collected. And then the API call is made and Shape comes back with a determination for you, whereon you take action there on or in your location or your cloud or wherever that is. So hopefully that answers that specific question. The next question I have is, my understanding is Shape has recently been able to support several credit unions that were being attacked. Would you be able to speak to any of those use cases? What was happening and how Shape helped? I certainly can. I'm probably the right person to do that. I'm actually the one who handled those 3 different organizations and have been involved in deploying for literally hundreds of the credit unions throughout the US getting Shape protection. So the credit unions are dealing with a pretty similar problem that the larger banks have been dealing with for a while. And they've been leveraging Shape for years to solve this problem, which is credential stuffing. So people coming to the login page and trying the credentials. And that's just the beginning of a typical attack chain, meaning a lot of times they're not trying to break in and commit fraud right then on that account. They're typically just validating that the credential is legitimate. And if you've got MFA involved, they're going to turn around and sell those credentials that they've now proven are accurate or correct credentials to another threat actor who knows how to circumvent MFA. Or they're more versed and have the tools and are a lot more sophisticated to break in and commit that fraud. And so the credit unions really are dealing with the same problem where their applications are getting overloaded. Their customers are getting MFA requests that they didn't initiate, which initiates calls to the help desk and a loss in confidence. And they've brought Shape in to stop that attack chain at the beginning, where we knock out all that fraudulent traffic, which eliminates all those problems downstream. We've actually also have a couple credit unions who are leveraging our anti-fraud engine, who have put it in place to start catching additional fraud above and beyond what their current fraud tools are catching. That's all the questions here we go. What is included required for the POC process? So that is dependent upon your current infrastructure and how you want to roll out that POC. But a lot of proof of concepts can be done very easily, either through a DNS redirect, if you're okay with that, where we're going to inject the JavaScript using what's called the Silverline Cloud. And from there, we're just going to pass all the traffic on. So it's a monitor only mode. It's very non-invasive. It's easy to set up. It's very quick. A lot of times we can have that up and running in 30 minutes to an hour. And non-invasive. However, if you don't want to go that route, the 2 other ways that's pretty easy to set up a proof of concept is if you have a CDN or an F5 application, you can send traffic to Shape there. And in a lot of those instances, it's actually not even sitting in line. We're able to do it such that it's in a monitor-only mode. The traffic isn't really flowing to Shape and then back to origin. You're just passing all that information on to Shape while the original request goes on to origin. A third way is by just sending us logs. if you have traffic logs, you can send us your traffic logs and we can do an analysis and come back and tell you exactly how much automation your applications are experiencing based upon those logs. Now, the logs are not as accurate as having a full POC in place, because the logs, we're just using our header fingerprint and our network effect in order to determine those, but it's pretty accurate. It's just not as accurate as having all the other telemetry that we would normally collect.
And I just want to point out one more thing. As companies move workloads to the cloud, and these attacks are happening, 50, 60% of your sort of traffic is being generated by these bad actors. I mean, every database query, every ELB request, it all adds up. So, I mean, being able to put something like that in front of it, it's not just necessarily the fraud of physical money. It's also a computer use fraud as well.
Another question that came in: what type of logic do you use in Shape to stop these attacks? Can you please explain to some extent? I think you answered it, but if you can share some more, please advise. So I can answer some of it, but some of it is the secret sauce. So a lot of the logic and things that we use on the back end aren't things that we share with the public. I shared a couple, including the emoji challenge, the math challenge, but a lot of the logic that's used are things that we've seen before from attackers. Now, that does not include IP user agents or ASNs. One of the things that's very unique to Shape is we don't block something just because it came from an IP where a bad request has come from before. What we found is that increases false positives because threat actors leverage good people's IPs, your customers' IPs. And so blocking it that way, one, doesn't truly help with the efficacy of stopping threat actors, but then you also increase the false positives and upset customers. So the things that we look at, the logic that we use, is much deeper and richer set of signals, okay? How they move their mouse, how they click the mouse, how they type, whether or not they're lying about the browser that they're using, or the application. When it comes to mobile, we look at things like the battery life. We look at what the battery level is. How many cell towers have they hit recently? Things of that nature. So we use a lot of machine learning and AI on the back end that's analyzing all that information. But another thing that is very unique to Shape is what we call our stage 2 analysis. So our stage 1 is everything that we already know. It's all the things that our MI, machine learning, and our AI have learned and are applying real time. But we actually have a team of data scientists, we call this our stage 2 analysis, that are looking at all traffic, whether it's good or bad, to better understand traffic patterns, both so we understand better healthy human patterns so we can recognize more of those users, but two, it's also what enables us to detect the most up-to-date and recent attacks and attack tools that threat actors are using. There's a tool called Genesis, where when you leverage Genesis in a headless Chrome browser, you're actually able to circumvent the vast majority of solutions out there. When we first found that over 1.5 years ago, nobody had even heard of it. But it was that stage 2 analysis that caught it, because there was some patterns and some anomalies there that they started picking up on. And then they take that logic and that information and they pass it and build it back into our stage 1, which is the machine learning and AI, to take action on those things. So Rakesh, hopefully that answers your question a little bit about the logic that Shape uses.
There you
go. Does this solution work by itself or with help of an operations center like SOC? So we have 2 solution levels, is what I'll call them. The first is one that is a fully managed service. It comes with a SOC that's looking at your traffic 24/7, that will fight bespoke and new attacks that are hitting you for you, and they will do as much or as little as you want them to do. A lot of our customers partner with them so that the SOC is like a second SOC to them, supporting them in that effort. Some customers trust our SOC and have enough experience with them that they actually let them fight the attacks for them. So that's one level. Obviously, that's our more expensive option. We also have an option that doesn't come with that same level of SOC support. It still has a SOC to make sure that your traffic is flowing, that it's healthy, okay? And when there's new attacks that are hitting that, they take that in aggregate for all the customers that are not on that tier 1 product, and they take all that information and they build it back into the policies to protect them. But they're not gonna function as a second SOC for you. It's more of a premier support than a true SOC. Has the F5 acquisition enhanced the Shape offerings, or are there plans to do more integration between the two? There are quite a few plans on the roadmap as far as what we're integrating and how we're integrating it with Shape and F5. The acquisition has been really, really good for both companies. For Shape, it's been really good because think of how much traffic F5 sees on a daily basis, probably more than anybody else out there. And because of that visibility into that traffic, we're able to look and understand a lot more traffic patterns than we were able to ever before, as well as integrate ourselves into that traffic. Much simpler than we could have previous to that. A lot of the things that are on the roadmap have to do with F5's cloud offerings and their current WAF solutions, where we're trying to build Shape in those WAFs to work better together. And in some cases, hopefully I'm not talking out of turn. This is the problem with being a sales guy. You say all sorts of stuff and then you get in trouble later because you weren't supposed to tell anybody that. But one of the things that eventually we're working towards is that it's not called WAF or Shape, that it's just a solution that's integrated, that you pull the lever that you need, whether that's cred stuffing or some type of fraud solution, or something that's more behavioral WAF based.
These are good questions. Thank you.
They are good questions. I think that's all the questions that have come through so far. Any others before we wrap this up? Okay. Well, I really appreciate the time to speak with all of you. Hopefully you're enjoying the lunch piece of this. And Brian, I'll kick it back over to you.
Yes, I just want to thank again, Troy, and thank you everybody for joining our conference on this. And if you have any questions, please don't forget to reach out to your F5 SEs or AEs or myself or any of XIT account executives, and we will be more than happy to walk you through any of these particulars or help you set up a POC or whatever level of interest you have. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I guess we're done.